People are finding new things all the time. That's what happens when you take a world full of enigma and flood it with naturally curious humans. And some of the things that have been stumbled upon are peculiar to say the least. These are the 20 shocking things recently discovered. Number 20. River cubes. Imagine this. You're just out fishing with your children and you're trying to find unique trinkets in the water, perhaps by magnet fishing. And yes, that is a thing, and it's not as odd as it may sound when you realize what's in the waters of the world today. And when you get a hit, you pull up the nets and find yourself looking at 60 cubes that all have etchings on them. The cubes are small, but they're detailed, incredibly detailed in fact. They were fishing in a river in Coventry. As such, they thought that it was just debris, but then the father, William, looked closer and said that they were something that were so much more. They were out magnet fishing as their daily activity in lockdown and were relatively isolated at that point. At first, they had found some keys and some pennies and some other bits of things, and then they looked down and saw what they thought were tiles. They were actually live streaming it to friends on Facebook, and when they bent down and began to pick the things up, they also thought that it might have been rocks, showed them to the camera, and as they looked more and more of them kept appearing. Now naturally, those who were watching the live feed were amazed by these tiny cubes, but what exactly are they? After a bit of research, they found out that they were a kind of prayer cube in an Indian ritual. The things written on them are meant to help enact different kinds of prayers or wishes once they're thrown into running water. Just like a river, you know. That would explain why there were so many of these cubes in the river, and a lot of people are making prayers there. Before we go on, like this video, smash the subscribe button, and click the notification bell right now, or this centipede will crawl on your face when you're sleeping. Now it's time for the sweet topic. This discovery will give you nightmares. It certainly gave me a nightmare when I first heard about it. One guy would be exploring the ocean when he unexpectedly stumbled upon a lost German submarine from World War II. Inside of the submarine, he found these two photographs. As you can see, they seem to show Nazi soldiers meeting with extraterrestrials. If this is real, it is utterly terrifying, but what do you believe? As always, let me know your thoughts in the comments section down below using the hashtag sweet topic. Number 19. Dragon Stone. Legend has it that in ancient times, a long-lost culture made a wish to the gods for protection, and the gods answered and gave them special stones that turned out to be dragon eggs. These eggs would hatch into the dragons of legend and help them to rise up, but then they all vanished, and the kingdom with them. It's said that one of these dragon stones is still out there waiting to be discovered, and the dragon inside of it is waiting to be hatched. No, not really, but I couldn't resist. After all, who doesn't want a dragon, right? Especially if you really can tame it. What I'm actually talking about here is a stone that would be found in Arkansas back in 2020, and no one was really sure of what it was when they found it. First of all, it was a 2-foot long stone that had a bunch of markings upon it that made it look like the shell or a bunch of scales, hence the reference to the dragon stone. Equally as ironic is that the person who found it just found it in a field with no real digging required. So that asks the obvious question. What exactly are we looking at here? Well, nobody honestly knows, and that goes double for the internet, who are more than happy to let their opinions be known on the matter. What I will say is that it kind of looks like a fossilized turtle shell given its size and pattern on top. However, I'm not going to be so bold as to claim that it's that for sure. Could it be a dragon? Well, probably not, but people referring to it as a dragon stone is pretty cool. Sometimes the biggest mysteries out there are what we find in the ground beneath our feet. Number 18. Ancient wolf. One of the things that people often have a hard time processing is that some of the animals that are out there alive in our world today, in one form or another, were found in ancient times. You can find that multiple times over with some of the ocean creatures of the world, but there are some land animals that have a really long pedigree, if you will. A great example of that is the wolf, who has apparently been alive for tens of thousands of years. And if you don't believe me, well, then I have the perfect piece of proof for you, because in 2018, a Russian man was going for a stroll when he found something that he most definitely did not expect: a severed wolf head. Not just any head of a wolf though, but rather a giant one. You see, this man was not on the ground, it had been frozen in the permafrost in the area, and thus it was a perfectly preserved specimen. Being a good person, and no doubt someone who wanted some answers, he gave it over to some scientists, and they were the ones who determined that this wolf came from 40,000 years ago. And because it was so well preserved, it had its hair even still on it, and its teeth and tongue were intact. Oh, and if you're wondering why I'm saying that this was a giant wolf, the head of the wolf was 16 inches long. That's right, its head was over a foot long, so just imagine what the rest of its body might have looked like. For all of you Game of Thrones fans out there, this might have been your true dire wolf. Number 17. Ancient phone. Now, I'll be very clear here up front so your imagination doesn't run wild. No, I'm not talking about one of the earliest phones from Alexander Graham Bell, nor am I talking about an ancient technology that was very much a phone. Rather, I'm talking about an item that was found that honestly looks like a modern-day phone in terms of size and shape. But don't worry, I'll explain. You see, there's a place that's known as the Russian Atlantis, not because it's an ancient civilization that was buried by the waves, but because it's a place that is underwater all the time, save for a few weeks out of the year. When the water goes down, archaeologists try to go in and figure out what's there to be found. One such thing that they found was the skeleton of a woman that they named Natasha, a very Russian name, and as they were excavating her body, they found that she had a belt buckle with a very familiar shape. That was the shape of an iPhone. No, really, it does look like one. Just take a look for yourself. The belt buckle is made of gemstone jet with an inlaid decoration of turquoise, carnelian, and mother of pearl. It's believed that this quote-unquote iPhone was about 2,100 years old due to the fact that those decorations were currency at one point and time in the region. Either way though, it's a rather unique belt buckle, and it makes you wonder why she was buried with something that clearly had value. Perhaps like other cultures, she was to be buried with items of value to help carry her into the next path of life. Number 16. New kind of cloud. Next up, I'm not going to be looking into the dirt, but rather to the sky itself in order to observe the clouds. Clouds are something that many of you see every day, and as you hopefully remember from school, they come in many shapes, sizes, and forms. Some of them are nothing more than sun blockers, while others are precursors to rain, and others even still actually bring the storms with them. Clouds have been studied for quite some time, so you would think by now that we knew all the ones that were out there, but apparently we're wrong. In 2017, the first new type of cloud in 30 years would be documented. A new cloud species was added to the atlas called Volutus, more commonly known as a roll cloud by meteorologists. Roll volutus clouds are a relatively rare, low-level horizontal tube-shaped cloud, and you can see what they look like in pictures like these. But that's not all. There were also a new set of cloud features that were recorded recently thanks to very avid photographers and citizen scientists. For example, they took pictures of clouds that literally appeared to be dipping out of the sky and close to the ground, or clouds that had literal wave patterns to them, and so on and so forth. So even with something as basic as clouds, we still don't know everything that's going on with them, nor the abilities that they have, so who knows what we can learn about them and other things going forward. Number 15. The Atari Trash Horde. Now we'll rewind back to the early 1980s. Video games as a whole were a bit primitive, but they were addicting. Humanity had not yet had anything like this on a grand scale, so with the true first generation of consoles and the arcade machines taking your quarters, everything was booming. But then it would all go wrong. The quality of games and the systems that played them went down, to the point where people were not buying them anymore, and thus stores had a surplus of things that they actually couldn't sell. As a result of games like E.T., yes, the game that was based off of the hit movie and was also voted the worst game of all time, the video game market crashed and nearly died in America. The excess game cartridges and even consoles at times were then taken to landfills and simply dumped to be forever buried and forgotten. Until people began to want to find these old games and consoles, not to play them, but to sell them. Fast forward to 2014, and a group would be digging at a landfill where they knew that some of these items could be found, and the ET cartridge would be there as well. But that was only the beginning. The real jackpot, a sprawling, colorful patch of early 1980s Atari cartridges, unboxed games, promotional materials, booklets, and comics, all preserved by lack of water and oxygen under 30 years and 28 feet of trash. It was a literal gaming treasure trove, and something that no doubt made their day and their year. And it may seem odd that people are looking for games and materials to that history is the epitome of trash, but as the saying goes, one man's trash is another man's treasure. Number 14. Hammerhead worms. There are a few things in this world that need to be watched out for at all times and taken care of immediately if found. Poisons, toxins, leaks of things like oil, and more natural things like fires and forests are all great examples. But in terms of animal things to watch out for, that would be the rise of an invasive species. Because as places like Florida will tell you, if you have an invasive species, it can go from just being there to being everywhere within the span of a month or even a week or two, depending on the animal. There are obvious ones that you might know about, like certain snakes, but then there are less obvious ones, such as snails, and then there's the hammerhead worms. And the bad news is that this story is from this very year, and apparently they're spreading. Native to Asia and Madagascar, the hammerhead worm was transported to Europe and the United States in shipments of exotic plants. It's been in the U.S. since the early 1900s and is most commonly found in states like Louisiana, where conditions are warm and humid. But now, as the climate warms, these invasive worms are spreading, and that's a bad thing if you don't know. First and foremost, hammerhead worms produce a neurotoxin, tetrodotoxin, which is also found in the pufferfish. You know, one of the most poisonous creatures in the entire world, if not the most poisonous. That means that if you touch this worm, you could potentially die, or if your pet eats this worm, they'll die as well. Just as bad, though, is that they tend to eat other worms like earthworms, which means that they can mess up the ecosystem around things like farms, and that's a bad thing for the environment. 13. Taken Lake Michigan Stonehenge. It's always fascinating to see what people will label things when they come across them. For example, you might have heard about the so-called Lake Michigan Stonehenge for one reason or another, and you know that it was very much stumbled upon by divers who were looking for something else, but instead found this. To be clear, it isn't a monolith or even a megalith, and the stones aren't even sticking out of the ground several feet into the air. Rather, these are a line of stones that mysteriously go about a mile for no apparent reason. There have been attempts to try and figure out what's going on with these rocks, but various factors have led to minimal progress being done. Not the least of which is that local politics and the wishes of certain indigenous people have gotten in the way. That being said, it's still something worth talking about, especially since Lake Michigan is usually something that's only talked about for its water and not what's within it. Plus, if a Stonehenge is within one lake, what might be in the rest of the Great Lakes? We may just have to dive in and find out. Number 12. The Eyeball. The eyeball is one that was washed ashore on a beach in Florida, and I'm honestly quite surprised that it doesn't happen on more beaches more often and get reported on. It would cause a lot of people to fuss for one very basic reason, that it was a lot bigger than anyone expected. As a result, everyone was wondering where the eye came from and what it had belonged to. A lot of people thought it might be something like a squid due to how large that it was, so they took it to be researched, and the answer was actually pretty definitive. They were able to figure out that it was the eye of a swordfish, and it had apparently been cut out by the fisherman that had caught it and dumped out into the sea. Now, I'm not really sure why the man would have done that, but clearly he had his reasons, and it created a ripe old mystery when he did so. Number 11. Dighton Rock. Now we're taking a slightly different path on this one because it's an ancient mystery that nobody still has an answer for, even with all of the recent advances in technology, and that in and of itself makes it kind of unique and special, I'd say. Here's what everyone does know for certain. Sometime before the year 1680, someone left a 40-ton note on a massive rock in what is now Berkeley, Massachusetts. Who it was remains to be a mystery, as does whatever message that person wanted to convey. The finding of the rock was in 1680 when recent Harvard graduate John Danforth spotted the rock in what was then the town of Dighton and made a drawing of its carvings. At the time, Danforth was only able to see the top part of the carvings due to the rock being obscured by water, but later on, the rest of the picture would be revealed. Naturally, ever since it was unveiled to the world, people have been stating all kinds of theories about what it is and isn't, who it was made by, and what it's trying to be said. Whether we actually find out the answers is one in a long line of mysteries about this piece. Number 10. Woolly mammoth bones. Here's one that I'm sure many of you will enjoy. Mainly, I'm talking about woolly mammoths and how we're still finding bones of them even to this day. That's not exactly a shocking discovery, though. Well, it wouldn't be if we weren't trying to find them in places like Chelsea, Michigan. This happened in 2018 when some guys would be digging a ditch to install a drainage pipe when all of a sudden they hit something rather hard. After digging further, they found a set of woolly mammoth bones, including its tusks. They called in some experts and then kept on digging around the site where they found the bones, finding 20% of a full mammoth within a few hours. Most people do forget that woolly mammoths did indeed live in North America at one time, but finding remains like these, that's rare and quite special. Number 9. Mojave phone booth. Given that the advent of the cell phone age, a phone booth is sadly one of the archaic technologies that honestly doesn't have a real purpose in the world, except when it's in the Mojave Desert. Yes, it's true, there's a phone booth in the Mojave Desert, and it absolutely works. In fact, when a man found it in the desert, he was so transfixed by it that he would call it all the time trying to figure out who would actually use it. And it turns out there was a woman who was using it to make all of her phone calls. So he did the only logical thing he could. He made a website for it, published the phone booth's number, and as a result, everyone began to call the phone booth. That desert likely didn't go quiet for quite a long time. Number 8. The California Sphinx. Now here's one that's honestly both cool and shocking for all kinds of reasons, because back in 2017, archaeologists were working in the dunes within California, and they found something they didn't ever expect: the face of a sphinx. Specifically, the face of the Sphinx, or at least a plastered version of one. If you're confused, well, don't worry. This was somehow an intact plaster model of the Sphinx that was used in the movie The Ten Commandments that was made almost 100 years ago. The set of the 1923 movie included more than 20 sphinxes, and after filming, director Cecil B. DeMille ordered everything buried in the dunes 175 miles northwest of Los Angeles. And so, people are still digging them up today, and it's truly a unique and spectacular find. Number 7. Fish Ice Rink. Now, to be honest with you, this one is just absolutely plain weird. You see, back in 2016, the people of Japan's Space World had an idea. They wanted to turn their ice rink into something a little more exotic. And that idea? Well, they were going to put fish and other creatures in the ice and literally freeze them within the rink so that they would have a fish ice rink. Yes, it's real for some reason, but as you would expect, the rink created a lot of backlash, and as a result, it would be shut down, much to the surprise of the owner. He went on to say that he was shocked to hear the reaction, as the ice skating rink had become very popular since the opening and had an unprecedented number of visitors ever since. They had endless opinions on the project and were shocked. They're sorry for what they did and decided to close the rink that night. Number 6. Robot Railway Repairman. Japan needs to redeem itself, so we'll give you a little story that's honestly really cool. In this case, I'm talking about how Japan is slowly beginning to deploy robots to take over the world. I mean, sending them out to do repairs on things like railway tracks before they take over the world. But how does it work? Well, the robots are not actually acting on their own. They're actually being controlled by someone using a VR headset. Yes, the operator is using VR to control a robot to make the repairs that they don't want to go out there and make themselves. But why do this? Well, that kind of work can be very dangerous, and as a result, if they are not careful, someone could get hurt. Boo-hoo. Using a robot does minimize the risk, and that's something that everyone can appreciate before they take over the world. Number 5. Tsunami Pod. Now, I'm not really sure what to make of this one for a variety of reasons. You see, if there's one thing that can be very difficult to overcome and protect yourself from, it's a natural disaster. They can come out of nowhere at times and cause untold amounts of destruction. This goes especially for things like tsunamis, which are hard to predict, impossible to stop, and could literally wash people away, along with animals and buildings. And so, how can you survive such a thing if you're unable to escape its reach? Well, apparently there's a device known as the Tsunami Pod that'll keep you safe from the raging waters once you're inside, as well as to ensure that you're not crushed by debris. If you're waiting for the catch, well, that's that the pod costs over $13,000, not something that every family is going to be able to afford. Number 4. Gundam. Now, as you may or may not know, Japan is the true home of anime, and whether you're an old school lover of it, or you got into it because of Attack on Titan or My Hero Academia, you likely know about Gundam. They're the massive mechanical robots that humans pilot in order to fight wars, and they're totally awesome. And now, via a project that finished in 2020, they have become totally real. Because Japan made a 60-foot tall, 24-ton Gundam that could actually move, and we've never seen anything more beautiful in our lives. And before you ask, no, you cannot have one, no, it's not able to fly into space, and no, they're not going to be mass-producing them anytime soon. But the fact that they made one at all, well, that's poetry in motion. Number 3. Rice murals. Never doubt the power of people coming together to make something that makes no sense and yet is incredibly beautiful. In Japan, they had a problem. They didn't really have a way to be able to attract tourism to a small village, and they wanted a way to fix that. But all they really had to use were their rice paddies, so they used those and made murals via them that truly boggle the mind in terms of creativity, scope, and attention to detail. Make no mistake though, this does take a long time to plan out and do, and there are over 1,000 volunteers who come out every year to make these rice paddy murals happen. And as you can see, they almost pop out of the ground. They're that good. Number 2. Traditional automatons. Are you ready for another robot story? Well, no, it's not as cool as the Gundam, but it is honestly pretty special. This is the story of a woman who was a school teacher in Japan that wanted a new method of teaching students about things, and so she went to a technical festival and laid her eyes upon a karakuri, a traditional automaton. Like many other karakuri, the one that she saw at the festival was entirely wooden, but also mechanical. A system of concealed gears within the doll allowed it, when cranked, to automatically perform a programmed task. In this case, it was to serve tea. She was completely amazed and learned of the furniture maker who did these dolls and sought them out, and over a long period of time, she learned to make these machines herself, showing you that sometimes inspiration can come from the most basic and traditional of places. Number 1. The Killing Stone. And since we're just in Japan, let's stay here one last time to end the video, because there are many legends of monsters and spirits that once roamed the land, and one of them was that of a fox spirit that allegedly was sealed within a killing stone. But the problem? Well, in April of this past year, the stone mysteriously cracked, and as a result, the spirit is allegedly loose in the world once more. There are multiple versions of that legend, but it's believed that it was a 9-tailed fox spirit who lay trapped in the rock for 900 years. And yes, if she got out, well, you should be ready for even more weird things to happen. That's all from the realm of the world and the recent discoveries that have been made within it. Were you indeed shocked by any of these discoveries that have been found over the recent years? Which of them do you feel will change what we all know about our own world? Are there any others that could fit on this list? Be sure to let me know all about it in the comments section down below. Be sure to check out the other cool things that are showing up on the screen, and I'll see you next time.